So while she was reading it, she just missed the most important parts? Almost like Taylor Swift's reimagining of Ophelia, LMAO. I think the plump cow wanted to just rely on the legendary status of Wuthering Heights to get bums on seats. Ophelia, the MAGA version. I hope it shows the masses how dense they are being when it comes to art. Don't ever take your foot off this movie's throat.
I've never been cancelled on the internet before. Maybe today is the day. Welcome back to another episode of Marza Defends Famous Blonde Women on the Internet. As a ginger, this is not how I thought my life would go. Of course, I'm kidding. I'm not defending anyone, and the blonde ladies are gonna be fine. I want to talk about us. Let's start with this. This video will not be a review. This video should not be interpreted as either full-throated defense nor negative criticism of these artists or their works. I am interested in the what and the why, and not so invested in the whether or not. In the months leading up to the release of air quotes Wuthering Heights, my algorithm was mostly showing people who were very upset or disappointed with a number of anticipated problems with the upcoming film, especially the casting of Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff.
A white man? No!
There's a lot of people who believe that Heathcliff should never be cast as a white person, and I suspect my algorithm was mainly showing me that perspective because people most avidly defending the casting choice are probably not people who would agree with me on a lot of other things. So it's very possible that I'm about to react to an echo chamber and not a consensus. So what are the criticisms of this big budget, high profile, star-studded adaptation of a literary classic? What is the goal of this discourse? Does this discourse rely on the erasure of necessary ambiguity and some misleading claims? And does perfect accuracy even matter if the discourse is in pursuit of a worthwhile goal? I'm going to be getting into some very complex and very sensitive subjects, especially in the beginning. Please refer to the content warnings and be respectful in the comments, okay? I am not one of those cool YouTubers who doesn't moderate my comments. I will absolutely delete your mean post. Be nice! First, we're going to unpack the most controversial choice, the casting of a white man as Heathcliff. This section will include a fact-based overview of what Emily Bronte may have known or believed about race, what the scholarly and critical interpretation of the text has been over time, and how the current discourse is interacting with both of those things. I'm going to try to avoid editorializing too much in this section and be as objective as possible. That said, this will still be a white lady talking about race, and it will also be a white lady talking about other white ladies talking about race, so if that's not for you, I get it. Let's first establish how Heathcliff's race and appearance is described in the novel. He enters the story as an orphan of unknown origin, in the port city of Liverpool, and speaking gibberish. Some modern scholars believe that the setting of Liverpool suggests associations with the transatlantic slave trade. More on that in a minute. Other scholars point out that gibberish would have been a stereotypical way to describe Irish at the time, though textually, it could be referring to any language or no real language at all. The descriptions of his race are speculative and conflicting. Mr. Linton muses that he might be a Spanish or American castaway. He is referred to as a Lascar, a term for a South Asian sailor, and many times with the G word, which is now widely considered a slur for Romani people. So if you're not Romani, please stop saying it. Though his racialized descriptions are usually negative or neutral, Nellie once comforts Heathcliff with grand imaginings of his parentage.
You're fit for a prince in disguise. Who knows but that your father was Emperor of China and your mother an Indian queen, able to buy up with 1 week's income Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights together, and you were stolen away by wicked sailors and brought to England.
Here we also see that some characters view race as somewhat mutable if there are changes in class and status. His hair, eyes, skin, and countenance are described again and again and again as dark or black. It is true that in this time period, descriptions like dark or black were sometimes more metaphorical, intended to be atmospheric or insulting. But it is still safe to say that Heathcliff is not a light-skinned Anglo-Saxon. Crucially, he is othered. He is visibly different from every other character in the novel. Even his own biological child is not described with racialized language. Most scholars believe that Heathcliff's ethnicity is intended to be ambiguous, and that the ambiguity is not incidental, but a part of the story. Heathcliff's origin and culture are also a mystery to him. That said, this doesn't necessarily make the ambiguity neutral. Intentional or not, this exact kind of ambiguity has functioned to erase people of color from literary works for hundreds of years. You may have heard defenders of Elordi's casting saying something like, well, Victorian ideas of race were totally different, or you can't project modern ideas of race onto the past. But what does that actually mean? It's true that Victorian ideas of what race is and what that means were ongoing questions of scientific and anthropological study. But it is very hard to talk about that without getting into harmful pseudoscience. Suffice it to say that while race-based bigotry and prejudice absolutely existed, it is a little challenging to map those ideas directly onto our ideas of race. As far as what Emily Bronte herself may have known or believed about race, we know almost nothing for a fact. She does have surviving letters, but they're mainly social and domestic in nature. There are no primary documents either from her or those close to her that discuss what she may have believed socially or politically or personally about race. We do know the newspapers she would have read, namely the Leeds Mercury and the Leeds Intelligencer. We know that those newspapers were printing debates around the abolition of slavery. Emily Bronte's father, Patrick Bronte, has even closer associations to the abolitionist movement. He came from a poor family, and he struggled to fund his own education. Evangelical leaders at Cambridge learned of Patrick Bronte's dedication to ministry, and they found sponsors to help fund his education. These two sponsors were William Wilberforce and Henry Thornton. Wilberforce was an outspoken leader in the abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire, and Thornton was a major financial sponsor of these efforts. Today, the word evangelical may conjure up images of megachurches and hypocritical racists.
The media said Joe Biden's president. Ha 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 ha.
But these evangelicals were very progressive for their time. While we don't have evidence of a personal friendship between Patrick Bronte and these sponsors, this association, along with his evangelical beliefs, make it very likely that he was at least sympathetic to the cause of abolition.
Hi, editing me. I was wrong. I found something. At least once, Patrick Bronte wrote a letter to the Leeds Intelligencer, and in it he very clearly makes his stance against slavery known. I will read it here. The whole ubiquitous system of slavery, the barbarous practice of dueling, and the no less pernicious course of legal murders, capital punishment, which I have referred to, ought to call forth for their abolition, the immediate, simultaneous, powerful, and constant exertions of a Christian and enlightened people, nor should our legislators have any respite till these reasonable and scriptural demands are complied with to the utmost. Patrick Bronte, pro-abolition, confirmed.
The transatlantic slave trade in the British Empire ended in 1807. That was 40 years before the publication of Wuthering Heights, and about a decade before Emily Bronte's birth. Yet she sets the events of the book in the years just before abolition. Okay, so sounds like Heathcliff's race is pretty central, right? Well, among literary scholars, it's not as clear-cut as you might think. Scholars agree that his othering is central to the plot, and he is definitely othered because of his race, but there are also many other ways in which Heathcliff is othered. For one, he's othered by class. An impoverished orphan with no wealth of his own, he must lie, cheat, and steal his way into any status he achieves. Class mobility in Victorian England was extremely limited. There are also themes of othering in which Heathcliff is described as somewhat non-human. He is frequently described as demonic or supernatural. His wildness, slovenliness, and turbulent emotions also position him as somewhat beast-like, or closer to the brutality of the natural world than to civilized society. Another huge facet of Heathcliff is his cruelty and violence. He is by no means the only abusive or cruel character in the novel, but he is far and away the worst of them. The novel explores cycles of abuse, with Heathcliff beginning as a victim and becoming a perpetrator, but it does not do so to forgive or to excuse him. In a more literally faithful adaptation that maintains all of these important themes, you can see how casting a man of color in this role could contribute to very harmful stereotypes, especially because he would necessarily be the only person of color in the cast. It's important to consider the harm that might be done when making this casting decision. Though not the predominant interpretation, there is a school of thought that Bronte's authorial point of view was itself racist. These scholars believe that Bronte was not presenting a critique or exploration of racism, but rather expressing her own racist views through the character of Heathcliff. This theory suggests that the book explores imperialist anxiety about being usurped by the racial other. I do think it's worth emphasizing that if Fennell had chosen to explore the othering of Heathcliff specifically through the lens of race, that would necessarily make him the only person of color in the cast. And that's not necessarily bad either. And you're certainly not going to catch me saying that it's totally fine that Heathcliff is white just because you threw in a couple of other race-blind castings. Editorializing alert, but Shazad Latif was so good. And I know a lot of people wanted him as Heathcliff, and I think he probably went ahead and credit that too. He's very good.
Well, it's just always funny when you know you're going to be playing the cuckold to Jacob Elordi.
I think it's really easy to make Linton into like a foolish loser, but he was so tender and paternal. So when he realizes that Kathy is betraying him, it doesn't feel like collateral damage. It feels genuinely very sad. And my favorite favorite part of the movie was Chau. Her Nellie was so bitter and repressed, but in a way that was still so sympathetic. Fennel's world is super fantastical and surreal, so she always managed to be like an extremely human presence in a very surreal world. It has long been my position that Chau should be in every movie.
These are tortillas. Tortillas deliciosas.
Yeah, so what are these?
These are tortillas.
Opinion voice off. Heathcliff's race absolutely can be read through a post-colonial lens, and I think it enriches the text. But that perspective is relatively recent. It's even more recent than the interpretation that the text itself is racist. Through the majority of its history, published scholarly works primarily discussed Heathcliff's othering based on class and beast-like wildness. The earliest work that I could find that explicitly discussed Heathcliff's race, not as like an ambiguous supporting quality of his othering, but as something very specific and central, was Maya Lisa von Snyder's article, Wuthering Heights and the Liverpool Slave Trade. Do you want to take a guess what year that was published? 1995. And to be clear, there were very likely conversations and unpublished essays that did interact with Heathcliff's race in a specific way before the 90s. There also might be published ones that I just didn't find. And I am sure that some readers saw pieces of themselves represented in pieces of Heathcliff as a person of color before the 90s. For what it's worth, explicitly feminist readings of Wuthering Heights were not popular until the 1970s. Now, I've also seen a number of claims on the internet that the Victorians were so shocked by this work because of how it explored race. Now, it was certainly considered shocking, and a lot of critics didn't like it. It was described as inartful and vulgar, but there are precisely 0 extant or known Victorian-era reviews that mention Heathcliff's race.
Hi, editing me again. I hesitated to put this in because I don't want it to be used as like a gotcha, but after Emily Bronte's death, Charlotte Bronte wrote a foreword to Wuthering Heights, and in it she does describe her opinion on Heathcliff. About Heathcliff she says, "We might say that he was a child neither of Lasker nor G-word, but a man's shame animated by a demon life, a ghoul, and a freak." So it seems like she is more of the opinion that Heathcliff is not altogether human or literal, and he's more of a manifestation of man's cruelty. While she isn't necessarily expressing Emily's position, she is someone who was very close to Emily. That doesn't really mean anything about what Heathcliff's race is, and this was written after Emily's death, so take that for whatever context it is for you. She could also be saying that all of those things are true and that he is both man and symbol. So this is not conclusive, it's just context.
Victorians were shocked by its brutality and cruelty, by its wildness, and the fact that it didn't offer a clear moral. A lot of the internet discourse has started to revolve around the claim that Heathcliff's race is the most important thing about his character, and/or that the entire novel falls apart without it. While that is absolutely a valid interpretation, it's not a universal one, and it's definitely not a historical one. So the idea that that is the scholarly consensus, or Emily Bronte's intention, is not exactly accurate. Now, you could certainly say that you think that scholarly consensus is wrong or outdated. It's totally a fair opinion to say that you think those scholars are a bunch of out-of-touch ivory tower academics who don't really have the range to understand the book. Wouldn't be the first time. It could certainly be that we are at a turning point right now. Oh, that's probably not the right turn of phrase.
Stop.
Maybe the tides of consensus have turned. Maybe a post-colonial interpretation of Wuthering Heights, where Heathcliff's race is made central, literal, and specific, will become the most dominant interpretation. I still think it is worth investigating honestly and accurately as a conscious righting of historical wrongs and not the accurate interpretation that is how it's always been. Now, what I am seeing a lot of on social media is people repeating a racial slur to prove their point.
Right. When is there going to be feral? Oh my God. Oh my God.
There is something a little unsettling to me seeing scores of people online, including a lot of white people, clamoring for this adaptation to be both more faithful to the source material and to make Heathcliff's race overt, literal, and specific. Why is it so important to you to see a man of color of a necessarily specific race, because it's a movie, abusing white women and children and killing dogs? Why is that representation so deeply important to you, Brittany? I do think there are versions of that interpretation that could exist, But I don't think that a wealthy white person is who I would like to see write or direct it. Fennel got a lot of heat for this comment.
The Heathcliff casting, I mean, has had some comments around if that should be a person of color and, you know, casting Jacob in it. What do you kind of think about that commentary?
I think the thing is everyone who loves this book has such a personal connection to it. And so you can only ever kind of make the movie that you sort of imagined yourself when you read it.
All right, editorial voice back on the table. I don't love that. I do agree that this book is virtually impossible to adapt completely faithfully, but not merely because it's like long. In my opinion, both Heathcliff's ambiguous heritage and the fact that like everyone has the same name, I think that's intentional on Bronte's part. The novel explores the cyclical nature of violence and abuse and how that becomes toxically entwined with passion and love. When the ambiguity is clarified by being made literal and visual, like in a movie, our impulse is to begin judging individual characters, their actions, their circumstances. We lose sight of the confusing centrifugal force of the cycle. Fennel is clearly drawn to characters for whom disempowerment and trauma make them vengeful and cruel. Her protagonists are never out for justice. They're out for themselves. Saltburn's Oliver sees the luxurious successes of the upper class as an injustice, one that can only be righted by killing them and taking it all for himself. Promising Young Woman's Cassie is out for eye for an eye vengeance. She is deeply personally invested in her victim's suffering. I was always kind of confused by the good for her type readings of either of these characters as class-conscious or feminist heroes. I don't read them that way at all. I read them as stories where pain and inequality might not make us better or stronger or more moral. It might turn us into villainous assholes. I think her films are pretty cynical. If anything, I think they read as warnings to the powerful. We with less power than you, we are just as wretched as you are. But I think the powerful already believe that. With all of those themes in mind, it makes complete sense to me that Wuthering Heights would be Emerald Fennell's favorite book. It's Hurt People, the novel. Now that the movie is actually out, it is clear that Fennell took a vibes-based approach. This adaptation is worlds away from the novel. In anachronism, in tone, characters are merged, plots are changed. There's a whole lot more kinky bodice ripping, which is to say any. It is a surreal and imaginative world where walls are made of skin and strawberries are the size of your face. Socio-political elements aside, this was never going to be a movie for the purists. Full disclosure, I am not a purist. Especially when it comes to public domain works of the established literary canon, I think reinvention and recreation and reinterpretation can breathe some really interesting life into these texts. And I think anyone is allowed to do so from whatever perspective they wish. All art is referential. And this just sort of takes it to its furthest logical extreme. That's absolutely my kind of thing. To me, Fennell's approach to Wuthering Heights calls to mind Anne Bogart's theory of violence. In her book, A Director Prepares, Bogart discusses 7 principles that can either help or hinder the creative process or product. It's catered to theater directing, but it can apply to pretty much any art form. Violence, as she defines it, is those irrevocable acts of permanence, disagreement, or restriction that fundamentally alter a piece. This could be as small as the placement of a chair or the first brushstroke on a canvas. Art, she says, is violent. To be decisive is violent. We tremble before the violence of articulation, and yet without the necessary violence there is no fluent expression. When in doubt, I look for the courage in that moment to take a leap. Articulate a thing, even if I'm not sure it is right or even appropriate. If she has nothing else, Fennell has the audacity. With her theory of violence, Bogart basically claims that the audacity is something that all artists should have. Fennell did not take a reverent or faithful approach to this text. She was, in the Bogart sense, violent. She made huge choices and she took huge swings. These were not, in my opinion, shallow choices of fan fiction or personal gratification. They were in service of the themes that she wanted to explore. The relationship between eroticism and the grotesque, power, ownership, and voyeurism. I'm interested in exploring what it is that makes us so angry with Emerald Fennell. Now, my goal is not to tone police people who feel personally harmed by representation lost. I definitely think we should be having a conversation about how to repair the material harm of representation lost. And as always, I think it's appropriate to disagree or have critique. I do too. Rather, why does this discourse feel so rigid? There seems to be an eagerness to gather evidence that identifies her as bad in a moral or political sense. That even if it's a choice you wouldn't have made, it is wrong to ask why it was hers. The other primary criticism is to say that Fennell is stupid. She didn't read the book at all, and if she did, she's too dumb and too privileged to really understand it. Time and time again, I saw comments to the effect of this. This is like when Taylor Swift tried to write about Ophelia. And you know what? In a way, I think you're right. Now, I know a lot of you probably have Swift fatigue right now, and I get that. She continues to be incessantly popular, and it continues to piss a lot of people off. But don't worry, this is going to be fun, as long as your idea of fun is talking about Shakespeare and doing a close analytical reading of a pop song. And you're still here, so it probably is. A lot of people seem confused about an album titled The Life of a Showgirl, opening with a song about Shakespeare. What do these two things have to do with each other? Is Taylor Swift stupid? I do feel uniquely qualified to wade into the waters of this discourse as someone who has spent time in both the ponds of Showgirl and Shakespeare Girl. We're going to do a pretty close read of the song, touching on Taylor's public life and discography, as well as the references to Shakespeare and Hamlet. This will by no means be exhaustive, and I will try to go fast so it doesn't get boring. Big picture, 101 read, this song transitions us into the beginning of the Showgirl era from the end of the Tortured Poets era. Like in the Tortured Poets department, Hamlet deals in themes of toxic relationships, madness, and madness as performance.
As I perchance hereafter shall think meet to put an antic disposition on.
So to my mind, you don't really have to read much further into it for it to work on a basic level, but we're going to. My first note is pretty much just for fun, but the opening lyric, I heard you calling on the megaphone, perfect iambic pentameter. She uses iambic pentameter and tetrameter throughout the song as a motif, and I think that's cute. The other thing about the opening line is that many people will immediately interpret this as being about her very public relationship with Travis Kelce. And it could be that this surface level reference is exactly what the line is about. It is certainly true that that's what she wants our attention to be drawn to. The Travie Baby interpretation also opens the song up for its biggest criticism. The fate of Ophelia in the play is that through her virtuous obedience to all of the men around her, she is eventually led to madness and ultimately her death. So a critical feminist interpretation of the song could certainly be to say that you were saved from Ophelia's fate by another man is regressive and reductive. But here's the thing, there are no male pronouns in the song. She could have been saved by a group of people, by a system, by a place, by her mom, by a concept, by her cats.
Someone comes into your life and rescues you from the fate of being driven mad by love.
It does sound like she was writing about a someone and not a something. But when we assume that it is only about Travis Kelce, a lot of the interesting readings are closed off to us. And I'm not trying to say that this song definitely isn't about Travis Kelce. It certainly could be. There are a number of literal references to things that he publicly says and does. But we will soon come back to why this interpretation is specifically relevant to Hamlet, and why I think it undermines the critique people are trying to make. Now, there's a lot of fire metaphors in the song. From a Hamlet perspective, I'm not really sure if there's a direct correlation there. The word fire is spoken 13 times in Hamlet, Taylor's favorite number, but it's also spoken like 14 times in Coriolanus. I think it was like 20 in Caesar, like 15 in Lear, and that's where I stopped counting. A lot of the uses of the word fire in Hamlet are referring to the stars, the sky, the firmament. In the song, Taylor describes the subject as a pyro. It's a metaphor for blowing things up. The fire allusions could also be a contrasting parallel to Ophelia's watery death, but I don't know. Taylor has recent uses of fire imagery in the Eras tour, most notably when she strikes a match and burns the lover house to the ground. Historically, she's used colored heart emojis as shorthand for each album, so when she announced Showgirl and the theming was like orange and teal, people expected that it would be the orange heart. But instead, she chose the red heart in orange flames. If all of these flames mean more, we are yet to see exactly what. The lyric, "I swear my loyalty to me, myself, and I, right before you lit my sky up," is an interesting lyric in terms of Hamlet and Ophelia for two reasons. Number one, Ophelia absolutely did not swear her loyalty to herself. Ophelia is a lot of interesting things. Independent girl boss, she is not. So if that's part of the fate that she's being saved from, then that does deviate from the text. Unless, okay, we need to talk about Polonius. So Polonius is Ophelia's father. Polonius is kind of a villain. He's also kind of a goober. He thinks he's a lot smarter than he actually is, and he kind of wanders around talking like a Hallmark greeting card all the time. Unfortunately, it is one of his lines that is often earnestly quoted in high school yearbooks and social media bios the world over.
"This above all, to thine own self be true."
One of my biggest Shakespeare pet peeves. In a way, this lyric sounds like she's taken Polonius's cornball advice to heart, something Ophelia certainly might have done out of her characteristic obedience. However, in this line, Polonius is lecturing Laertes, who is Ophelia's brother. He will come back again. She has another allusion to the text when she says, "You dug me out of my grave and saved my heart from the fate of Ophelia." Let me set the scene. Act 5, Scene 1. Ophelia has just died by drowning. Queen Gertrude has just told us the story, and she implies that the drowning was an accident. even though it may have been self-inflicted. A lot of people interpret this to mean that Queen Gertrude is protecting Ophelia. This scene opens with two people digging a grave. They are humorously arguing about whether or not this is the proper kind of burial for what looks to them like a suicide. We are a smart audience. We realize they are digging Ophelia's grave. Hamlet shows up. He trades a bunch of dark jokes with the gravedigger. Ophelia's funeral procession shows up. Hamlet hides. He figures out whose grave they're digging. Laertes, Ophelia's brother, he's all pissed off that Ophelia is getting a proper Christian burial. He is kind of an asshole, but then he jumps into her grave to like hold her one last time. So then Hamlet comes out of hiding and he gets into Ophelia's grave too. Hamlet and Laertes start fighting and they're like showing off about who loved her more, spoiler neither, and it's all very messy and embarrassing. Basically only in death do two of the men who are closest to Ophelia say how much they loved her, and they're only doing it for clout.
Why don't you go cry about it at the country club that you name-dropped Mom to get into, Preston? And Kimber, you're literally wearing her clothes right now.
Oh, we were very close.
Okay, I'm just gonna say it. I think she killed her.
Taylor has used grave and gravedigger imagery in the past, probably most notably in the Look What You Made Me Do music video. Zombie Taylor emerges herself from the ground. We see a headstone that says, "Here lies Taylor Swift's reputation." Then Zombie Taylor buries this serene, innocent-looking version of herself in her Met Gala dress. There's a lot of lore here. I don't have time to unpack it all, but basically, there are some rich parallels here. Then she has this evocative passage. "Love was a cold bed filled with scorpions. The venom stole her sanity." I like this section a lot. It feels very Shakespearean, but it to me sounds a lot more like Scottish play than like Hamlet. There's a scene when Macros is all stressed out about killing Duncan, and he says to Lady M, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." But again, totally different play, totally different scorpions, totally different mad woman. There's also a single reference to scorpions in Cymbeline and Henry VI Part 2, which are, of course, everyone's favorite Shakespeare plays. In Hamlet, there are several references to venom, although they are only indirectly related to madness. For example, the king was killed with poison in his ear, and that's sometimes referred to as venom in the play. So it works on a thematic level, but I'm not necessarily seeing a direct allusion. In the bridge, we get what I think is the most direct reference to Hamlet. "'Tis locked inside my memory, and only you possess the key. No longer drowning and deceived, all because you came for me." Okay, second half is more straightforward. No longer drowning, Ophelia dies by drowning, and deceived, there's this part where Hamlet basically says to Ophelia, "I never loved you," and she goes, "I was the more deceived." And in context, it is devastating. It's a very iconic line. But the first half of this lyric comes from a much earlier scene in the play. It's not a direct quote, but it's pretty close. Act 1, Scene 3. Laertes is telling Ophelia that Hamlet is bad news. And before he leaves, he's like, "Remember what I said about Hamlet, okay?" And she replies,
"'Tis in my memory locked, and you yourself shall keep the key of it."
And you yourself shall keep the key of it. Pentameter. So, if the you to whom the speaker refers in the bridge is the same you as in the rest of the line, let alone the rest of the song, and in this, the most direct reference to Hamlet, that you is referring to Ophelia's brother, that opens up the distinct possibility that the subject of the song is not a romantic interest at all. Rather, it points to our rescuer being a platonic and potentially kind of toxic person who was warning her away from her toxic love interest. In the music video for the song, there is no love interest depicted. Rather, Taylor takes us through a tour of various interpretations of the Showgirl, an artist model, a chorus girl's dressing room, a 60s girl group, a stage actress, a sort of Esther Williams Busby Berkeley moment, a vamp tied in the ropes of a theater's fly system, a classic Vegas showgirl, and an after party. Most of these tableaus emphasize the artifice of the theater, the camera, or the audience. The closest thing you can get to what is arguably a reference to romantic love is a teeny tiny little picture of Travis Kelce on one of the dressing room mirrors.
I'm never gonna plant an Easter egg that ties back to my personal life. It's always gonna be towards music.
Now, before I move on to my final point, I do want to reveal what I personally believe the song to be about. This interpretation of the song is textually supported by the source material, by the lyrics of the song, and the interviews she's given to describe it. It is thematically relevant to both Showgirls and Shakespeare girls, and as someone who is both girls, it is a reference with which I am deeply and intimately familiar. The 2010 Second City YouTube sketch by Brian Gallivan's sassy gay friend Ophelia. Oh my god, Martha, you're so funny. No, I'm dead serious. Meet Ophelia. The sketch begins. She is about to take her own life. Then who should appear but her sassy gay friend in what? His orange scarf. Ophelia's sassy gay friend lovingly insults her off the literal and metaphorical edge.
Instead of drowning yourself, you're gonna write a sad poem in your journal?
and move on.
And saves her from what? The fate of Ophelia. Case closed. Not only is this theory unquestionably the only true and correct reading of the song, it is also the only thing that took me from being a little bit of a Showgirl hater to a fan. I needed this. We needed this. Okay, back to my boring Shakespeare analysis. It's time to really dig into the criticism of this song. The argument is this. Taylor reduces Ophelia to a damsel in distress. She is saved from her fate of controlling patriarchal men by a man. That's hardly a feminist take on the story. Some go further and say if that's her take on the story, she must not have understood Hamlet very well. She must be pretty stupid, not the brilliant mastermind she makes herself out to be. Some go even further than that, calling this her foray into MAGA-adjacent, conservative-coded tradwife grifting. But that entire argument relies on one very specific reading, that the song is completely autobiographical in nature, and that it is literally about being rescued by Travis Kelce. And I sort of get it. Ever since the super publicized debut of Tavis, when a lot of people hear Taylor Swift, all they hear is this. So happy that my Travis made it to the big game. Taylor and Travis are in a PR relationship. Now, they might still have a real relationship behind the scenes, but everything we see, it's something they want us to see. These are two brands coming together to make their brands more lucrative and to create an effective media narrative. I truly don't care whether or not they're in a real relationship. I don't know these people. If they are, hell yeah, I hope they're happy. And if they're not, hell yeah. I think PR relationships are fine. I think they're fun. If I were as famous as Taylor Swift, I would absolutely give the media enough to talk about so that people don't go snooping around in the stuff that I want to keep private. But again, the reading of the song that Taylor is a damsel being rescued by Travie baby relies on the audience knowing things about their relationship and filling in the gaps in the song. Because it's not all in the song. Now feels like a good time to remember the theme of the album. This is about the life of a showgirl. And this critical take, to a certain extent, means you've been watching the show. A major plot point in Hamlet is the play within the play. At the beginning of the play, the ghost of Hamlet's father appears to Hamlet, and he tells him that he was murdered by his brother, Hamlet's uncle, the now king, Claudius. Hamlet decides that he's going to catch King Claudius in his guilt by staging a play for him and the members of the court. The play dramatizes a fictional event that is strikingly similar to the real murder. At the crucial moment, when the actor playing the murderer pours the poison into his fellow actor's ear, it looks like it kind of works. Claudius gets up, he interrupts the play, he demands that the lights get turned on, he storms out, and the rest of the court follows the king's suit. Perhaps the showgirl understood Hamlet after all. And perhaps her reluctant captive audience is revealing something about themselves by how they react to the show. Hamlet calls the play the mousetrap. And for the Swifties, dear reader, if it feels like a trap, you're already in one. In an interesting way, this connects directly back to Fennell's interpretation of Wuthering Heights. Both of these artists got criticized for being stupid and misunderstanding the texts. These dumb broads are illiterate. While I think there are fair things to critique about both of these artists, I certainly don't think that they're dumb. Before I saw Wuthering Heights, I saw a lot of early reactions describing it as smut or fan fiction. I very much went in brace for it to be all style and no substance, and while it's definitely not the deepest film I've ever seen, empty and sexy wasn't my takeaway either. Spoiler reminder, but here's an example. The film opens on a blank screen. We hear a rhythmic squeaking and labored breathing. The squeaking picks up speed. We're all thinking it. But then bam, the scene unfolds visually before us, and it's a man swinging on the gallows. The onlookers are eager and lusty. A young Catherine is frenzied, jeering at the hanged man. This is her opening scene. No such scene appears in the book. This is her opening thesis. This tells us that Fennell's adaptation is introducing themes of voyeurism and spectacles of the grotesque. It's exploring the tension between eroticism and violence, but also the tension between eroticism and the pageantry of punishment. I believe that she is opening the film this way to implicate us as audience. Perhaps in our enthusiasm for sex and violence, and perhaps in our own erotic eagerness to see others punished. Obviously, both of my interpretations are subjective, but I am interested in the way that both Fennell and Swift seem to be in direct conversation with themes of a vengeful or voyeuristic audience. And at the same time, their own reluctant audience is missing or ignoring these themes and calling them stupid. To me, art is most valuable when I think of it as a tool for understanding, for depth, for growth. Right now, it seems like a fashionable way to interact with art is to use it as a barometer to determine whether the artist is morally and politically good or bad. And when I really sit with that, I don't know what tangible good that does. And to be clear, not all of the criticisms that I discussed here are without validity, but I think a lot of their amplification has been lazy, and I'm not worried about how this is going to affect Fennel or Swift. Those famous blonde ladies are going to be fine, even if we think they're annoying or we don't like the things that they make, even if we find them to be capital B bad. I am worried about how this impacts us. The literary canon will survive reinterpretation. That feels hardly worth mentioning. If fidelity is important to you, may I suggest a subscription to the BBC? The question is not whether the works can survive reinterpretation. The question is, what value might we unlock if we can stand the discomfort of not knowing exactly where the artist stands? If you're watching this to glean a simple takeaway that you can repeat in public, I think you know you're not going to get it. But if you're looking for someone to give you permission to hold ambiguity, to challenge your own perspectives, and to withstand some discomfort, you certainly have mine. But when the noise gets loud, I hope you remember that you never need anyone's permission except your own.
Did you guys know YouTube has a new feature called the hype button? If you guys would press the hype button, that would mean so much to me. If you are interested in talking about politics, society, and art through the lens of movies and pop culture, subscribe, like, share. Love you, bye!